Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Our guest today, my partner in conversation, that is Carla Birnberg. Carla has a really interesting story to tell. She lives in Austin, and I don't know where else in the U.S. she's lived, but we'll find out because we'll drill down and get it out of her. But she spends her waking hours thinking of and assisting people, especially children with disabilities in Kenya, and helping them to become more accepted, which makes a lot of sense. And of course, needless to say, that's near and dear to my heart. And we will get to all that as we go through our discussions. But for now, Carla, I want to welcome you into Unstoppable Mindset and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it took a beat for us to get the date together, and I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we made it happen, which is really good.
Made it happen.
There you go. Tell us about the early Carla growing up and stuff like that.
The early Carla.
Yeah, I got to hear about the early Carla.
I laugh because I've been thinking a lot, that question that career counselors and coaches ask you, what did you dream of being when you were little? And I don't know, this will date me. That book, Harriet the Spy, you're a man, you might not be familiar. It was more of the girl type read. But Harriet walked around her neighborhood pretending she was a spy with a notebook, writing everything down. And I kind of think that my current career as chief storyteller, I've achieved it. And there were some deviations along the way, but my whole life, that's really been it. Listening to stories and amplifying what other people are doing.
Carla the Spy, no doubt about it.
I know. Maybe they can make it into a movie.
Well, why not? Now, who played Harriet? I'm trying to remember. Was it
I can't remember.
Rosie O'Donnell?
I think she was.
Yeah, I think it was Rosie O'Donnell.
I think you're right. I had forgotten.
I don't know whether she was Harriet or she was the mother, but she was in there.
I think she was the mom. She was. And that was, I can really remember walking down my street as a kid with that notebook and the pencil. Yeah. And I hadn't thought until right now, so thank you, about how far I've come and how not far.
So now, no pencils, keyboards.
I know. Keyboards, voice notes, and our phone, all of it.
So you absorb stories and all that, and tell me a little bit more about you and growing up and all that.
I was pretty theatrical. I did a lot of television work when I was younger. And I thought for about 3 minutes that I wanted to be on-air talent. And I interned at our CBS affiliate. And then I quickly realized that wasn't my gift. Again, it goes back to, I didn't want to be on the screen like you. I wanted to be more behind the scenes, writing the stories. Ended up in college for English literature, small liberal arts school in Ohio where there was not much else to do but read. And I kind of stayed on this books and storytelling and marketing path my whole life.
Now, where are you from originally?
Pittsburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Shout out to the Steelers. Yes, I'm a Pittsburgh girl at heart, even though I've not lived there in maybe 30 years.
Well, that's okay. There are people in New York who say the Dodgers will someday move back to Brooklyn, and
they keep waiting.
Not quite sure that's going to happen. Of course, now with Shohei Ohtani, I don't think they could afford to move back to Brooklyn. So that's another story. But
no, but you never know.
It isn't going to happen. They're going to stay out here. But anyway, that's cool. So you love to be creative. I interviewed. I keep saying that I shouldn't. I had a conversation with a gentleman yesterday, and his name is Wolfborn. He changed his name to Wolfborn. His middle name was Born in honor of his father, Max Born, who was a very famous physicist.
Oh, wow.
He had the name of Wolf. He was a nickname. His original name was Randall Born, ready for this, Newton-John. He's in Australia. So who do you think his aunt was?
Olivia.
Bingo.
Am I supposed to sing now? I loved Olivia Newton-John.
talk about a guy who comes from a really creative family.
Wow. Yeah.
And he calls himself a corporate shaman because he really wants to help organizations and people especially move closer to nature and understand that nature has a lot to it can do to guide us and teach us. And so he really is heavily involved in that. But
Okay,
you know,
that is fascinating. And I'm with him in terms of I'm not myself. This is why I don't move back to Pennsylvania because of the cold. I need to be immersed in nature every day, preferably barefoot in the grass. It helps me ground myself so I can show up for other people.
he would say though that there is time to deal with cold as well because
I
we
know.
race around so much that we way too hot. And so the result is that we don't really deal with
Yeah.
nature. We don't tune into nature, which
Yeah.
goes in cycles. And we ought to do more of that.
Oh, I'm such a believer. And I just kind of emerged from wintering, which, Michael, I thought I invented, but clearly I did not. When we fall back till we spring forward, I really try to get still and plan for what's coming next, both at work and personally.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I learned a long time ago that I'm not going to worry about springing ahead and falling back. Frankly, what I do is go to bed an hour earlier when it is spring. And that way, I come right out adjusted to the time anyway. And as far as falling back, I won't stay up an hour later. I like to get the extra hour of sleep, so I'm good.
And, that is, I think the Kenyon, my team, that's the most challenging time of year. When we fall back, I'm further. So it's 8 a.m. for me, they're done. It's 5 p.m. for them. I like when we spring forward because I get that extra hour where they're in the office. They have to adjust a lot to my USA schedule.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of work, of course, with Accessibee.
Yep.
And the thing about Accessibee is that they just switched yesterday night, I guess, to daylight saving time.
Oh,
So so it's been a challenge because some of the scheduling hasn't always been coordinated very well. Microsoft hasn't really done some of the things
no.
that it was supposed to do.
So I guess that night before, the Sunday before, the first Monday after we sprung forward, I was like, Carla, you've been doing this for years, but let's focus. Okay, so 8 a.m. Do we need to switch this? Outlook didn't change the meeting time. Like you said, it's on us.
Yeah, when we cope.
We do. That's because we're resilient and we're creative.
So, what did you do once you left college? Well, before you said your degree
Yeah.
in college was what in writing?
English
English literature.
literature.
Yeah.
It seemed like a really good idea. I have a daughter who's 18, and my liberal arts degree has been great for cocktail conversation. And it's a lovely degree, but I wasn't really ready to do much after graduation. So I, as one does, worked in an outdoor store. I loved climbing and hiking, and I worked there probably for a year. And my mother, God bless her, Jewish intellectual parents, came into the store one day and said, guess what? You're going to graduate school. Now, I'm not paying for this, but it's time to get doing something else. And so I got my master's degree in educational counseling, which
Okay.
was, I use it every day and I don't use it at all. It's one of those, it's been very helpful, but I've not used it in a traditional fashion.
Fair. I understand and empathize a lot. I got my bachelor's and master's degrees in physics,
Oh,
but
wow.
circumstances ended up having me go in different directions. But
Yeah.
I would never regret the times and all that I learned in physics, the details, the kinds of things I learned, some of the more basic life lessons like pay attention to details
Yeah.
that are so important. And there's some examples of that in terms of why it's important in physics. But for me, I took it more to heart in a general way and really worked to pay attention to details. More of us ought to do that and observe what goes on around us and learn to recognize what is working, what's not working. Do really pay attention to the details to find out if the details are going the way we expect. And if they're not, why not? Because it might very well be that they have something to teach us.
That's a really phenomenally interesting takeaway from a physics degree I wouldn't have thought of. And you're right, that's a skill we all need because we need to know when to pivot, when to change what we're doing. And if we're going too fast, we don't even notice.
Right. So you got a master's in education.
Yep.
And then what?
And then I moved for a job. I was very excited. I packed up my car. I'm going to Chapel Hill, North Carolina for a job. I get to Chapel Hill and welcome, but there's no job anymore. So again,
Oh,
pivot. And this kind of took me, I don't really believe we get off our path because everything comes together, but I ended up becoming, and if you knew me in my childhood, this shocks everybody actually straight up through college, a personal trainer and not athletic at all. And I ended up opening a personal training studio, but with that, it was master's in education with an emphasis on counseling. So those counseling skills, yes, I did need the fitness knowledge, but the counseling skills really helped make me successful as a personal trainer. And then I sold my training studio, moved to Austin, and became a big online personal brand, all sort of by accident.
why personal trainer? What got you to do that?
Back then, I probably would have said because I love paying my rent and my bills, and it seemed like something I could do to make some money. But I know myself and what comes easy to me, I'm not a good teacher of. I could never have taught the clarinet, came very easy to me. I could have taught math because I struggled with it. I'm not naturally someone who's very adept with fitness, terrible hand-eye coordination. And yet I knew when I started lifting weights briefly in college, for women, much more than men, it's where we can find our voice. It's where we can discover our power. And so after that happened for me, I kind of wanted to proselytize or evangelize and share that with girls, mostly University of Chapel Hill undergrads
Mm-hmm.
and women in the area. Because I believe in it so much, teaching us to be strong and take up space and speak up. It's really where I found my voice.
Why didn't you stay with it though? You sold it eventually and moved to Austin.
Sold it and moved to Austin, and no more brick and mortar for me ever. I mean, it was great, but I knew there was a way, and I figured it out sort of with group of, we call ourselves the OG bloggers across the United States. How could we give away what we were passionate about, what our knowledge was in, what our skill set was, really for free on the internet? So I was working at the Austin American Statesman by day, writing features, working in their education department, and a blogger by night until the blogging by night got so big that I left the Statesman and made that full time.
Ended up getting out of the newspaper business.
None too soon, to my chagrin. I mean, I'm sad that it's kind of dying off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll be a sad day if we lose newspapers.
I absolutely agree. I mean, that's some of my best memories of being a family growing up, the Sunday New York Times, the local
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburg paper.
So you really got into blogging, and what were you blogging about or what were you doing?
It's that master's degree. It was personal development and fitness, but not prescriptive, not go to the gym and lift this weight and do it this way. It was more, what's your language of encouragement? A few iterations back. What's your why? How do we get to the gym? How do we commit to fitness? How do we figure out why this is even important to us so we can achieve the goals that we've set for ourselves?
Okay, well, going back even a little bit further and deeper, why Austin?
I was married.
Okay,
And it came down
that'll do
to,
it.
yes. And, it is, I love the city. It's changed a lot, but I'm still not one of those, and there are many of them now, just old Austin was better. And as we've grown, it's changed and I love it just as much. I've been here 24 years.
Long time, huh?
Yes. And I have no plans to leave yet unless they price me out, then maybe.
Well, so you got into blogging and all that, and that's a good thing. But as you pointed out, needing incomes and so on. So how did all that work for you?
So, well, I mean, gratitude. I read somewhere once, and I'm sure someone famous said it, and I should quote them, but I can't remember who. If you woke up tomorrow with only what you were grateful for today, what would that look like? And I have such a gratitude practice kind of framed around that. And I was very lucky financially with the blogging. Got in at the beginning, worked with some big names, Fila, Birkenstock, Wonderful Pistachios, Sears, who I think is no more, worked with Venus Williams, and really made it into a lucrative and enjoyable and impactful, I could help people career until everyone became an influencer. And I read that landscape and thought it might be time to get out.
So the idea was they were sort of sponsoring you, or they were paying you to write blogs for them?
That's it. They would come. I mean, this was back in the Paleozoic era, like 2006, let's say, when I started. They would come with, okay, we have $35,000. What can you do for us? How many videos? How many posts will you write? And we can put it on our website, Sears, Venus Williams, Birkenstock. Can you do print advertisements for us? So it was before everyone was an influencer, where I get it. If I were the brand, I would think I'm going to pay 50 different UT students $50 each and see what I get versus these big paychecks to the original influencers.
Yeah. So you did that, and again, at some point, it sounds like you pivoted into what?
Well, let's go back to March 2020. It was before then that I read the landscape. I had some podcasts that I hosted, so I know how hard you work. And I had written a book. And at that point, I was working with Venus. So she blurred the cover of my book. And I thought, where do I go from here? I was doing Livestrong, was a big website at the time, some content creation for them. And I was just in that moment of what should my next be when the world sort of started looking like it was changing. I had already been in conversations with a startup in Austin and Nairobi about doing some marketing for them, potentially just fractional short-term CMO. And I thought, I don't know what's happening here, COVID, and I'm going to do this because I don't think it's the time to work the gig economy, even though I don't know what's happening. And I mean, again, gratitude, said yes, took the leap, had never done anything like this. I'd done the marketing. I'd never worked globally and just thought, I'm going to give this a shot. And I mean, it is no understatement to say it is the best yes I've ever said. Second to working with Venus, it's the best yes I've ever said.
Why is that?
It has changed my life. I mean, I traveled a lot as a child. My dad was a professor, so he would take his sabbatical he did it twice in London. So I lived in Oxford, and I'd been exposed to the world, but not in this consistent way. And the backdrop of my entire life, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious, is tikkun olam, which means repair the world. And really, we can't fix everything. So let's take our little tiny corner and try to fix it up as best we can. And I'd watched my parents do that. And I'd done some volunteering, but this global experience and giving me an opportunity to really take my gifts and use them in a different way and meet so many different people. And it's just shifted my life perspective. And I'm so grateful.
Well, yeah. So tell me more about kind of what you did and what you're doing now. I'm assuming it's all related.
It is the short version with the startup, as with many startups. Our whole goal was to eventually have the entire C-suite team, moved to Kenya. After about 2.5 years, that's what happened. And I can tell you, I could have looked for a totally different job at that point, not gotten up at 4 a.m. But gratitude, spiritual practice, I just really felt that my work in Africa wasn't done. And I shifted to our foundation and I was the head of culture and inclusion with the for-profit startup, and moved kind of back to marketing on some level and became the chief storyteller for Next Step Foundation.
And the Next Step Foundation sounds pretty fascinating. Tell me more about that, if you would.
We focus on helping the historically, and it gets back to semantics. You and I had a really great pre-interview chat about that. The historically excluded. I now do not love the word marginalized, mostly from my project, persons with disabilities, but the whole foundation, it's women and youth and persons with disabilities. We recruit them, we assess what they need, we accommodate whatever their needs are. Maybe this is a young woman who has no digital skills. Maybe this young man needs a screen reader. And then we train them. And unlike many nonprofits in the global South, we don't just train, we then transition them into the job and support them in the job after mentorship, kind of making sure that they have everything they need so that they can be successful and feel successful. It's not all about the career. It's also about feeling really good about the work that they're doing.
So where does the Next Step Foundation function primarily?
It is mainly in Nairobi. So it's been a big shift. When I was with the for-profit entity, there were probably 17 of us in the States. Now there are 2. So around noon, it can feel like a ghost town. I love my team because they'll stay up late for me, but mostly in Nairobi. We have a small office here.
Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit more about what you do. And we definitely can have the discussion here that we had ahead of time, and I'll let you kind of lead that as to where you'd like it to go. But tell me a little bit more about what you actually do now and kind of how all that works.
It's such perfect timing for us to talk. I started chief storyteller. This is great. I got to help with some marketing language. That was fun. And my favorite aspect of the job, which is not my new project, is helping to create the impact narratives of our participants. Because it's almost like a puzzle where I interview them and then I get snippets. Half of the time it's in Swahili, so I pull in other team members to translate and kind of get that opportunity to weave it into a story. And our focus at the foundation is ethical storytelling. I have nothing to do with the story. My perspective doesn't matter. And in addition to that, and I know that the participants and people with whom I've worked at Next Step sort of chuckle, but we always ask for vigorous and consistent consent. So if I write Afontis's story and he says, yep, use my story. Yes, use my picture. He approves everything. I put it on LinkedIn. And then I want to share it on Twitter, I'm going back to him because it's really important to us as a foundation and me as chief storyteller. At any time, Afontis could say, you know what? I'm kind of over it. I don't want you to share my story anymore of going from X and acquiring my disability and then doing this and getting this job. And we would say, okay. So I love that facet of my job, the storyteller. And yet I had a little gap of time. And that's how this new project was created, the one that you and I have spoken about. And can I transition into that?
Yes,
You can
please.
tell I'm a little excited. Okay. I'm so thrilled. We just finished our pilot program. It's called Upili, which means secondary in Kiswahili.
And how do you spell that?
Upili.
Okay, great.
I know. I had on my Upili necklace, and then I have no idea why I thought I would be a grown up and take it off because I like to wear it in the community. So people say, hey, Carla, actually, I have a keychain. They'll say, hey, Carla, what is your necklace? What is Upili? And then I whip out my keychain, Michael, with the QR code on the back. And I'm like, thank you for asking. Here's the website and how you can give me money.
There you go.
So Upili means secondary. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we went into these special schools in Kenya, which is their way of defining the schools that are created only for persons with disabilities, typically very segregated schools for the blind, schools for the deaf. There are some which are for all disabilities, and there's some which they also call integrated, which means for people who do not have a disability and those with disabilities. The plan was to go into these schools and meet material needs, build perimeter walls, give them new desks, supply hot water heaters, things that are very important, and that I thought, this is the answer. We went to visit, and suddenly it dawned on the entire team, this is great, giving physical items, but this is also something many, many NGOs are already doing. They'll come in, everybody gets a new desk. They'll come in, we will paint and build new hostels, what we would call dormitories. So I met with our team who went to Joytown. This is where we did our pilot. They are all semantics, persons with disabilities, and said, okay, a lot of people are meeting this need for the physical items. What else is a need that is even more pressing? And this is when the conversation began around what I was aware of. I thought through doing the impact storytelling, I was not aware of the deep degree. And we started talking about the stigma around being a person with a disability in Kenya, the stigma from childhood, the discrimination as they grew older. And the more we talked as a team, the more we realized it's therapy. It's counselors with disabilities going into these special schools and doing group therapy with students with disabilities to give them that psychosocial support needed, filling the gaps with what they might already be getting at school. So they build their self-confidence. So when they graduate and finally graduate, I know I'm excited, at an equal rate to as their non-disabled peers, they can thrive. They can get the jobs because they process this past trauma.
So in general, how are disabilities treated in Kenya as opposed to in the US or in East Africa in general? How are they treated differently, or are they treated differently, or do you think that there are a lot of similarities?
I would be the first to say that as not evidenced in this moment, I'm a listener more than a talker. So I've had the interesting conversation about this with friends with disabilities in the States. I would still say that the stigma is tremendous. We've come a little bit further here. I've written the stories of a lot of my team members and the pressure on their parents after they were born to leave the baby at the hospital, to euthanize the baby, because there's still that fear in the villages, not so much in Nairobi, that the child is a curse. Mm-hmm. The family is now cursed. They hide the children away frequently. I remember one student was talking about how her mother had tried to kill her, and the assumption I came from was, oh, that's very sad. You know, when she was a baby, and she was probably 13 or 14. No, this had happened last spring break from school. There's so much shame and fear that I just don't see here.
Or at least here, it may be covered up more, but there's still a lot of it. We still hear of, let's say, blind parents who want to, mm-hmm. Who have a child, mm-hmm. and the courts want to take the child away, or there are battles around that, or parents who just shelter their children with disabilities and don't let them explore. Yeah. So
that's a great
I think it may be that the hiding is more sophisticated in some ways, But I think to a
Yes.
very large degree, it's still there. And I think that it is because of what you said. It's the fear. And what we don't realize collectively as a society is that disability shouldn't mean a lack of ability, as I
Yes.
tell people. And then they say, well, but disability starts with dis. And I said, yeah, and so does decipher, and so does discern. So what are you saying? The fact is that dis isn't the issue. It's the perception, it's the fear, it's the prejudice that
Yeah.
we all need to overcome and get to the point where we truly recognize that what disability is a characteristic that every single person has, except that it manifests itself differently for different people.
Yes. I mean, my past 4.5 years have been like a PhD, and I don't know what it would be, but I have been so educated by my team. And what you said made me think of a couple things. One is my go-to. I couldn't do anything without her, Miriam Ndegwa. She's my Upili everything, campus liaison. She has said repeatedly, if my parents, she has cerebral palsy, hadn't just been her mother and her grandmother, go. You're like any other child. No, we're not going to make accommodations for you. She said, always says to me, I would not have come as far. They didn't shelter me. And that she credits that to her success in life.
Yeah, and actually there are differences between accommodations and
Yes, you're right.
sheltering. But I know what you're saying. And the reality is that um, we make accommodations for sighted people all the time, right? We have lights in our buildings so that people can see where to walk. We have
No, you're right.
we have a coffee machine so that people can get coffee or tea or hot chocolate or something, even though it's touchscreen nowadays, so it's not even accessible for everyone.
Yes.
We have so many different things that we offer, but we like it to be more one-sided. We don't recognize that those are just as much accommodations as providing a screen reader or providing a ramp.
It's
And
that curb cut effect I had not heard
yeah,
of until 4 years ago. We use them all the time, the captions, all of it. And yeah, we avail ourselves of things that aren't created for us.
right. The reality is that we all have gifts and we all have things that we don't do as well as other people. And it is so unfortunate that we haven't, even in this country, taken the leap to really understand that.
No, and I think I see that much more clearly now. I see that much more clearly now doing the work in East Africa. I do, I think, and I was thinking about this earlier, and I almost reached out to you by email, and then I thought, no, you're such a brilliant man. I'm going to corner you and see what you think. That our therapists, so we always use counselors with disabilities. First of all, so that the students see the counselor and think, that's pretty amazing. I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't dream that was possible, but also they have shared lived experience. If we had a counselor, even Kenyan, go in to run this therapy group who didn't have a disability, they would waste 2 or 3 sessions trying to explain to him or her, this is what it's like being me in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
So she went in and thought, okay, we are going to practice affirmations using a mirror. This is going to be very interesting. The students might need some help bolstering their self-esteem and coming up with the affirmations. I'm on it. She was surprised, and again, woman with a disability, that most of the students in the therapy groups were completely unable to look in the mirror because they had kind of integrated all of the negativity that had come at them from their families, from the village. They couldn't even look at themselves in the mirror. And even she was shocked by that. And I'm really curious your thoughts on, is that unique to Kenya and that vast amount of negativity and stigma around having a disability? Or do you think that might be paralleled in the USA?
Well, I think there is a fair amount of it in the USA. I've not heard
Okay.
of anybody who said that they can't look at themselves in the mirror,
Yeah, it shocked me.
except for vampires. But But I do seriously think that there
Yeah.
are a lot of similarities. So I've told the story a few times on Unstoppable Mindset, but I did a talk a few years ago. It was a hybrid talk. And I talked about disabilities, and I talked about the fact that for blind people, in reality, the term visually impaired is one of the most disgusting things that people can say to describe us, even though it's what the so-called experts in the field created years ago. But visually impaired is a problem for a couple of reasons. One, visually, we're not different simply because we're blind. If you lose your eyesight, it doesn't mean that you're visually different. So that's a problem. But the bigger issue is impaired. Why am I being at all compared with person with eyesight? Why is it that I have to be considered impaired simply because I don't see? If you want to talk about vision, I think I got lots of vision. I just don't see good, like I'd love to tell people. Don't I talk well? Anyway, so I think that the term visually impaired is a problem. And I mentioned that in my talk. And I also said the better terminology is blind or low vision. A lot of people hate blind, but you know what? That's what I am. And I happen to be physically blind, and there are a lot of idiots out there who are mentally blind, and we won't go there. We won't go there.
No,
But
I've encountered a lot of them.
yeah.
Well, and that's
but anyway, so the issue with the talk is I gave this talk, and then I opened it for questions, and people could in the audience ask questions, or people could call in. And this one woman called in, and she said, I am visually impaired, and that's all there is to it. And I said, no, you're not. You're blind. No, I have some eyesight. Then you're low vision. No, I'm visually impaired.
Oh,
you see, the problem is all too often we buy into it, and we don't understand how that kind of language continuing to be promulgated around contributes to the view that people have about us. I love
that phrase, buy into it. That's it.
I am not impaired. And if I'm going to talk about being impaired, even though your disability is covered up so much because you have access to electric lights, just have a power failure and see what you do. You immediately look for a smartphone or a flashlight so that you can get light back, because Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb for you light-dependent people. But the bottom line is it still is only covering up your disability. Disability is a characteristic that we all have, every single person on the planet, and it only manifests itself differently depending on what your gifts are and what your gifts are not.
Okay, super interesting. And I'm sure I should have thought about this, but 54 and a half, I hadn't really thought about it much because I've never broken anything and I'm just getting to this point. But again, Miriam, my right-hand woman, will frequently say, in high school, I advocated for youth students with disabilities and people who had temporary disabilities. And that's a pretty big refrain from her. And the more she said it, the more I've thought, oh yeah, everyone is going to experience some sort of something, whether it's breaking your leg, whether it's becoming low vision, better phrase.
Or whether you suddenly lose power and you can't see what you're doing. And that's my point. And that's my point, is that the reality is the disability is there anyway.
Yeah.
But we do work, and rightly so, to offset disabilities that limit us, like a lack of light. It's okay. I have no problem with the fact that we have light bulbs. We have so many different mechanisms and ways of producing light for people. But be honest with yourself. It still is a disability, because the time can come when you don't have access to it. The time can come that a person who happens to be blind might be somewhere and not have access to information that we would like to have access to and ought to have access to.
Yes.
And only over more time will society recognize that it has to provide information to us in ways that work for everyone. I have a favorite example. I'm not going to really not be able to describe this very well, but I'm going to try. There's a TV commercial that goes on out here. And the commercial starts out with this woman saying, you know, Dad had this, and I don't want you to get it either. You have to really take care of yourself and take care of this right now, because if you don't, it is going to run your life. And I know that you're one of these, you don't really like anyone telling you what to do. Well, that's the end of the commercial. And I don't know what goes on. There is absolutely nothing. And I don't know whether you've seen that commercial or whether it's familiar, but there is nothing that says what that commercial is about. Now, someone this morning, I talked with someone who told me that it has to do with some sort of medical thing. And, but even she couldn't remember exactly what it was, because there is not a single verbal cue in that commercial telling you what it's about, much less making it accessible to me.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, as we all know, many times people don't sit in front of their TV during commercials. They look away, or they get up and they go to the bathroom or whatever. It is such a poorly designed commercial because of that. And it's unfortunate, but somebody figured, well, we don't need to worry about it other than people being able to see it, and they'll see it and they'll get it. No, they won't, because it's all too often that people don't watch the screen. And as I said this morning, the person I asked, who I regard as an extremely observant person, couldn't even tell me what company the commercial was about.
Oh, interesting. And you're right. The world's it's not set up accessibly. In many instances,
it's not set up accessibly or inclusively. We are much less inclusive than we ought to be. That commercial could have been created in a much different way to provide information to everyone, but they didn't. And it's so unfortunate. So it shows, in some senses, although I think we've made progress in this country, it also shows how far we have not come, because that kind of thing still exists.
Yes. I mean, I've thought so much about this since we set the date for the podcast, and just every day at work, that my perspective doesn't matter. It's been interesting to me to see feels like there's a big differential as far as the trauma outgrowth of being a person with disability. But other than that, that's really the only major difference. And that's what made us think, okay, we need to focus on mitigating this trauma so that the students can be successful.
Well, there's a lot of merit to having role models. And when you bring people in who are true role models, it makes a lot of sense to do that. And I think there's a lot of precedent for that. So having counselors, having people who come from the same kind of environment that they come from is very relevant. I spoke in Japan back in 2012.
I've never been there.
Well, it was the publisher of Thunderdog, my book in Japanese, brought me over for 2 weeks. And one of the things that I learned there was that if you are a blind person, I don't know if it's changed since then, but if you are a blind person, you are not allowed to sign a contract. Period. You can't sign a contract. Period.
Oh.
And I asked someone who was in the insurance industry why. And his response essentially was it should be very obvious, because you could be cheated. And I said, oh, so you're telling me that no sighted people in Japan are ever cheated when it comes to signing contracts?
Oh, exactly.
Even though today there is technology that allows me to fully read contracts.
Right.
At that time, the Kurzweil reading machine, the mobile KNFB Reader Mobile, although it hadn't come out in Japanese yet, but it has since. But the reality is, again, it's the prejudice. For many years, the Gallup polling organization and surveying people's fears said that one of the top 5 fears that people had was going blind, not even disabilities, but losing eyesight.
Oh,
Because
interesting. No, I've
that's
never heard that.
because that's what we emphasize, eyesight. But it's not the way it ought to be. Over time, it will change. And I firmly believe that we will see a day when television commercials like the one I described earlier will be not tolerated. But I think we're not anywhere near there yet. Somebody once said to me, I look forward to the day when we don't have to even use the word accessible because it's just such an automatic thing that everything is included for everyone.
That's it. That's it. And I don't know if you know who Judy Human is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I figured you did, but we seem like we came really far in her lifetime. And I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts. Will we get there? I mean, I know we're trying to in Kenya, where companies hire these, again, language there, persons with disabilities. They're trained, they're brilliant, they're ready to go, and they just start work, and everything they need is an accommodation. It's just the way the office is.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we get there here.
Yeah, I think we will. But I do think that the way the world is now, we have to legislate it because attitudinally, we're not there. You know, one of the big discussions in the world has been the internet. And many people have not made their websites accessible, hence the need for companies like Accessibility. But people have said, well, but we don't need to do it because the internet came along after the ADA. So the ADA covers physical things, but it doesn't cover the internet because it's just the way it is. Well, the reality is that's not what the ADA says. It doesn't talk about specifically and only physical places of business. And finally, in 2022, the Department of Justice edicted, if you will, that the internet is covered under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and websites should be made accessible and inclusive.
Yes.
But even so, most website owners don't pay attention to it. They think it's too expensive. But again, hence companies like Accessibility and what Accessibility brings. But also, the other aspect of it is that most people just don't even know. They don't think about it. It doesn't need to be expensive to make the internet or your website accessible or inclusive, but it's also the right thing to do because it covers more than just blindness. And the fact is that there are so many different kinds of disabilities that are affected by not having full access to the internet. And it's easy enough to do. And there are procedures and guidelines that describe exactly what needs to be done and how to do it if people would just do it.
That's it. And people don't. 5 years ago, I was people and it's know better, do better. I said to a big social media person the other day, I love your, I don't know what we're calling them, X's, your tweets, but you never use alt text on your pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
And so I thought it's what you said, that sometimes people are lazy websites. Sometimes people think it'll be too expensive. Sometimes they just don't think.
Some of us just don't know.
Yes.
We don't teach it in computer science schools very much like we should.
Yeah.
I'm involved with an organization that is creating its website, and they went out and got bids from 2 local places to make the website up and running, to get it up and running and operational. And I said, as part of the discussion, and what are they doing regarding accessibility? Oh, they say that they know how to do that. And I said, tell me more about that. Well,
yes.
One of the companies said, well, the fact is that it isn't the website design that has to be addressed. The person with a screen reader has to make the accommodations and make the modifications to work on the website.
Oh, that's not what we want to hear.
Well, oh, that is so wrong.
Oh my, yes.
And
Yeah.
so
We don't put
neither,
the
and
onus on them.
yeah, and so Accessibility is going to be the product that they use, rightly so, because the company, the website owner doesn't have a lot of money, but it will be possible to make the website accessible. And we found another company that will do the job for the
Mhm.
same price or less than any of the other companies, and it will include accessibility. And they will actually use Accessibility because it's such a great product to use for making this kind of thing happen. But the reality is the original people who were looking at getting the website quotes also were clueless. And they
Yes.
were ready to
Yeah.
buy into, well, it's got to be this guy with the screen reader that's got to fix it, until they learned we don't teach it yet. We don't teach real inclusion yet as a part of what we do. And it's something that we really need to look at. We'll get there.
You're
Well,
right. You're right. And it's people like me who I'm not doing any sort of web design, but I launched a Substack. I was late to that party, and I wanted to make it accessible, so I always have a voiceover. And a bunch of readers have said to me, "That's super neat that you read it." I'm like, "Well, it is super neat, but it's for accessibility." And like, "Oh, I don't even think about that." So I
yeah.
think it's the lay people we need to start spreading the word, and I don't know how we do that except for leading by example. Practice, not
Leading by
preach.
example, writing more articles, including
That's it.
disabilities in
Yeah.
the conversation. And all too often, we don't do that.
And that's why one of the biggest reasons why I love where I work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking the back seat. And when it was the for profit, I had a whole team of persons with disabilities who told me what was what and how things should be and what language to use. And I listened. And now, same thing. I will look to Miriam or Daniel or Terry or Becky. What do we need here? Why do we need it? I'll make it happen. But you tell me, I don't have the lived experience.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think the most important thing we need to do is to really push the conversation to always involve disabilities. When you talk
Always.
about diversity, what is
Yeah.
what is diversity to you?
And, I think I would have answered differently 10 years ago, but now it's always inclusion. It's,
Well, but that's not diversity. Tell me what diversity is. And use your answer from 10 years ago.
oh, okay. For 10 years ago, I would have thought it's bringing persons of color into the conversation and not having everybody look the same.
Race, gender, sexual orientation.
Yep. And
But
maybe not even sexual orientation, because I think I would have
well,
been
10
a
years ago,
decade plus.
no.
Yeah, I would have been like,
But three
yes,
and 4
race and
years ago,
gender.
yeah. But
Yeah.
today, race, gender, sexual orientation. Diversity is about difference.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't include disabilities. We don't include persons with disabilities or
And I
any
think
of
I
that.
know we do at the foundation. And do
Well,
you?
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because
Well,
I think
the
it's
the
pivotal.
issue is that that's why I give a speech entitled "Moving from Diversity to Inclusion." You
Mm-hmm.
can't be inclusive if you
If you're
are
not
not
diverse,
bringing disabilities into it, like as part of the
absolutely,
population. But we're
absolutely,
inclusive of color and so on, but you're not inclusive. You can't
yeah,
get away with it if we don't allow it. So we're not going to let inclusion be screwed up, if you will, like we have
yeah,
allowed diversity to be screwed up and
yes,
not including disabilities. And that's what we really need to do, is to take that step of recognizing that we're all part of the same planet and we all need to recognize that. And it's important to do that.
and I
Now,
know. I mean, that's kind of where my project fits into the greater umbrella of the foundation. Is the youth with disabilities, students with disabilities weren't graduating, and so the office landscapes weren't inclusive or reflecting the true population. And we need to help these students graduate so that the foundation can step in and train them and job place them so that we're inclusive. And the makeup of the offices look like the real makeup of society.
So what motivates you to get up and do those early morning or stay up for those late night phone calls?
Oh my gosh, thank goodness. I think this all the time. Even if I didn't get up early, I'm not late night. So thank goodness I don't work for a foundation in India. You know, I'm passionate, somewhat my Nespresso, which I love, but I've mentioned Miriam's name a million times, Beth, Wanjugu. I love my team. And I think when the alarm goes off at 4, it's noon or it's 1 o'clock, what's going on? I just love it. I don't know, it's my why. It's that notion of I'm not making a huge difference in the world. Somebody in the middle of Iowa has no idea who I am, but I'm making a tiny little impact and I'm loving what I'm learning and I'm loving every minute of it.
And that's the important thing. You love it, you love it, and you're going to continue to do it. If people want to reach out and learn more about the Next Step Foundation or maybe become involved in some way, how can they do that?
I would love it. I am up for a Zoom anytime. The best way to find me would be going to LinkedIn, and it's Upili and Upili. Message us. I would love to chat. We're always looking for insights from mental health professionals in the United States. Clearly, we're always looking for donors, but just conversations around what we're doing. And I'm always curious what other people are doing as well, how they are making an impact.
So just search for Upili on LinkedIn.
That's right, Upili. We have a website, it's upili.org, but either of those two ways, you can find me.
Okay, and that's all connected to the Next Step Foundation.
Yep, we're a project underneath them.
Cool. Well, I hope people will reach out. I know that they've heard me say some of these same things before a number of times, but it's great to hear the progress that you're making and the things that you're doing. And I really hope that we're able to contribute to bringing progress both in East Africa and that we, through this conversation, will get more people talking about it here in the U.S. as well.
Yes. And I always love both listening to you and talking to you because it gets me thinking in a different way too.
Well, we should do more of it then so that we can both learn to get different perspectives. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank all of you and I want to thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it, or watching if you're on YouTube. But wherever you're experiencing the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you'd give us a 5-star rating. We love those and we love your reviews. So please do that. If you'd like to reach out to me and have any questions or want to chat further about this, please feel free. You can reach me at michaelhi@accessiby.com. That's MICHAELHI at accessiby, ACCESSIBE.com. Or you can go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is spelled MICHAELHINGSON.com/podcast. So we'd love to hear from you. And if any of you, including you, Carla, have a thought of anyone who else we ought to have on as a guest, love to hear from you. We are always looking for people who want to come on and tell stories and talk about interesting things. And even if we talk about some of the same things we've talked about before on the podcast, I don't think it gets boring. And the more we do it, the more people will gain an understanding of it. So we sure look forward to hearing from you with ideas of guests and other people who ought to be part of the podcast. So thank you very much, and really appreciate your involvement in that. But again, Carla, I want to thank you for being here and for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.